Hello and welcome to the Victorious Souls podcast today with me, your host, Danielle Burnock from danielleburnock.com. That lady on the internet who loves you, connecting you to the love that heals. Today, I have with me a guest named Darryl Rodgers. And Darryl is a husband, he is a dad, he is an author, he is a speaker, he is on the board of the North Carolina Mothers Against Drunk Driving Board. And he also is a family recovery coach. So welcome with me today, my guest, Darryl. Thank you for being with me on the show today, Darryl.
Thank you for having me, Danielle. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to get into this. You have such an important story to tell about the loss of your son and how that impacted your life and where you're going now with your life. But before we get into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about you before you got married, before you became a dad, and whatever you'd like to share about, a little bit of history of who you are.
Okay. So I have one sibling, an older brother. We're 18 years apart.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's one time that he gave me a spanking, and I really deserved it too. I deserved
Wow.
it. I was really pitching a fit over something, how kids are.
Yeah.
And but that's the only time. And I don't think he remembers that because I brought it up not too long ago. We were talking about it. And anyway, but I had really, really good parents growing up. My dad was a Southern Baptist preacher. My mother was she'd had several different jobs, but her last job was as a high school secretary.
Mhm.
And being a high school secretary, first she was at the junior high that I was attending, and then the high school. And it's like I couldn't get away with anything. I mean, she was always right there. Not that I was a bad kid. In fact, I was always really quiet and shy, and I mean, painfully shy. So much so that the in my senior year of high school, you know how they have the superlatives, and so my classmates nominated me and one other person to as most quiet. So we were voted as most quiet, and I wouldn't start a conversation. I mean, if somebody else talked to me, I was a pretty good talker one on one. I liked it. I liked people, and I liked talking to people. But man, if there was a group of people and I wasn't familiar with the people there, I would not talk. And anyway, um, my dad. My mother used to say that before he got, when he got called to the ministry, that was his biggest thing that he had to overcome was being able to stand in front of people and
Mm.
talk. And I would have never known that if she hadn't told me because he didn't have any trouble, delivering sermons. But big thing for him. And so I guess we were a lot alike in that regard. And I've overcome it later in life too. But man, he being a Baptist preacher, and he was a preacher at I grew up South Carolina, and it was um about three different towns. We moved around a little bit, a couple of different towns, and then the last place we were there, he retired from there, was there over about 15 years. And that's where I consider my home. It's right outside, about 30 miles from Columbia, South Carolina, rural farm community there, close to St. Matthews, the closest town. Our community was called Sunny Plains,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, and like I said, small church, and just oh man, great people, great salt of the earth people. Mm. I get
Small
emotional just
town
thinking
and
about
a
it. Oh
preacher
yeah.
skid. Did everybody know everybody's business?
Oh
Was it
yeah,
like
yeah.
that?
And that was the other thing, at school, sometimes I felt a little bit left out because there were other kids there at school that their dads were on the board of deacons, or they have parents who are members at the church, and you're like, well, we can't involve Darryl in all these things that we're doing because then word will get back to our parents. So yeah. Um, uh, anyway,
So
my
how did all
dad.
of that, you got married later in life. How did all of
Yeah.
that affect your married life or being a parent yourself, being, a preacher's kid in a little town when you got married? Did you
Mm.
stay in a small town, or did you move somewhere else, or?
Well, my first job, my brother was a pilot, and he started off. He flew helicopters in Vietnam, flew combat
Oh,
missions in
wow.
Vietnam. And I was 4 years old, and he was flying helicopters in Vietnam. Um, yeah,
So you probably thought
and
that was pretty cool. Oh, my
I
brother flies
did. I could.
helicopters.
Yeah, I remember the day he was wearing his dress greens, and we took him or went with him to the airport and saw him off, saw him get on the airplane and leave for Vietnam, and that sticks in my memory. Everything about that day, for some reason, really
Well, that's a
sticks in
big
my
deal
memory.
going off to war. I mean, the
Oh yeah,
Vietnam War, that's a whole
yeah.
other thing to talk about.
Oh
You said
man, yeah.
dress
He
greens. Was he in the army?
Army, yeah.
Army. Okay.
Yeah, and I later went to Army flight school and became a helicopter pilot myself.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, he really inspired me a lot in a lot of ways. And I started out on the civilian side of things, and I got my helicopter license when I was 18.
Oh, wow.
I was flying at 16, and yeah, so I got an early start with all of that. But my dad, getting back to him just for a minute, he um, loved to fish. He loved to bass fish,
Hmm.
and because we lived in a farm community, and he was a preacher, he got invites to all the community farm ponds to fish, and so he and I would bass fish a lot in these farm ponds, and it was just a great bonding time. And my parents, they brought several different teenagers into our home that came from troubled homes, and
Oh, wow.
never adopted any of them, but raised them like their own kids. When I was growing up, and I just got to see them. They really walked the walk. I got to see them help people, and they just really had a heart for people and for helping people. And I got to see that. Now, my dad, um, he had a little bit of a temper, and
Well,
most
nobody's
people,
perfect.
right? Well, most people didn't see it because he wasn't like that in public. But sometimes he would get a little bit of a temper, and um, and I can't remember any specific events, but I know that he yelled at me some, and I remember that really bothered me
Mm.
when I was a kid, and I know that he knew that it had an impact on me because when I was early on taking my flying lessons, I was struggling a little bit with one phase of it, and I told him, flight instructor's yelling at me, and I just shut down when somebody yells at me. I don't do well with that. I learned to do better with it later, particularly when I went to basic training, you know. But he went and had a talk with that flight instructor, and yeah,
Wow.
and they changed the way they changed it up, and I
Wow.
got through that, and I really saw him mellow out probably in his 50s and 60s, just really mellowed out a lot with all of that. So and I've kind of done the same thing, I've I used to be really, really, and I'm a very passionate person. So I go from quiet and easygoing and loving people and wanting to help people to, man, when I'm fired up about something, buddy, you're going to hear about it. If I get to that point where I'm ready to do battle, man, I'm fired up. So there's that whole military side to me too. But anyway, that sort of shaped me, I think, a little bit,
Hmm.
and I've had to learn how to what's the word I want to look for here? Temper that a little bit, just like you temper a knife.
Hmm.
I used to hear my dad use that same illustration, but it's good to have things that get you motivated and get you fired
Oh,
up, as
yeah.
long as you can keep that in perspective, and
Hmm.
keep God first in your life and let Him control your actions. Um, so anyway, that's a little bit about some of my experiences growing up.
All right. How old were you when you got married?
Okay, so we didn't talk about this
Oh, we don't have to
beforehand,
get
but
too much into that. I'm just kind of leading into,
it's
you had your
okay.
son.
It's okay, but
We got to share the story of your son because you lost your son and it
yeah.
changed your life. And I'm just trying to lead the people there. You
Uh,
don't have to tell any details. We can just
no, that it's
kind of
okay.
skip along because, it would be a very long story and we don't have all day, right?
Right. Well, I do want to mention this. I'm on my second marriage and final marriage. Okay, so the first one, I was really young when we got married, and my dad did not. He was the preacher, right, and he did not believe in divorce and remarriage. And I was like, "How's Dad going to handle this?" Because he was very strict about that. I mean, there were people who would come to him and ask him to perform the wedding ceremony, and one of them was divorced. He's like, "Nope, I'm not doing it." That's how strict he was with that. But he performed both of my wedding ceremonies, and the first marriage only lasted 2 years. There were no children, and man, I look back on that now, and I'm like, oh man, we were just too young, and I wish we had had some pre-marriage counseling, but anyway, uh, you know, I'm we have sort of reconnected, and it's fun. I mean, we're friends, it's fun. But
And there's the grace of God at work.
yeah,
And there's the
absolutely, yeah,
grace of God at work because God does
mm,
hate divorce because it hurts people.
yeah,
Not that he hates
absolutely,
us. He
yes,
hates that it hurts us.
mm-hmm,
There's
mm-hmm,
fallout from it. That's why it's not good. But we need the grace. We need the grace. I mean, he had
definitely,
Moses give them the ability to write divorce back in the Old Testament. So there is a place for it. And
mm,
there is definitely a place for it. There's abuse, there's
mm-hmm,
horrific things that happen in some people's lives. So I am not anti-divorce, but I'm not trying to get anyone divorced either. So
right, yeah,
I just understand that it
yeah.
is a horribly painful thing for whoever's
Oh,
involved.
absolutely, yeah. And there's several pivotal moments in my life, and that was probably the first big one, or one of
Mm.
the first big ones for sure. Um,
And
very,
then you
very
got married
painful
your
thing.
second time, and then you have
Yep.
two children, three
Two
children,
children,
two.
7 years apart,
Mm.
Justin and Chase, and my wife she is very supportive of everything I do, and she has been my rock. She is really, really something else. Good lady, good Christian lady, and man, I don't know where I'd be without her. Um, Probably sleeping under a bridge somewhere. Because there's a lot of
Oh,
times, I've been self-employed most of my adult life, and there's a lot of times that we weren't doing so well financially, but she's a hard worker, and she's kept a roof over our heads when I wasn't performing so well. So, but and a great mother too, and
mm.
just losing our oldest son was devastating. I think, as hard as it was for me, I don't know, it just, and I didn't, she's very good about, I don't know if I should say good about, because sometimes I think she should be a little bit more open, but I think sometimes, she wanted to protect me from knowing how much she was hurting. She figured I had my own grief to go through. And
Mm.
so she wasn't telling me everything. She was how bad she was struggling, when we lost Chase. Um, but yeah, both boys, Eagle Scouts, both good athletes, and both played sports from the time they were really little, right on up through high school, and both got into college, and played college sports. And anyway, and Chase, he was man. When Kim was expecting, when she was pregnant with Chase, he, from the very early stages, he was busy. I mean, her stomach was moving all around, and we knew this kid's going to be, he's going to be a little, ball of fire, and he was. That she shares that the only time that she ever saw him get tired was the day he learned to walk. And he would just keep trying and falling and trying and falling until he finally just collapsed in the floor. And but he was diagnosed ADD, ADHD early on. We weren't too sure what to do with that because we really hadn't experienced that, and
Well, what
we
year
were
was that? How long ago was that?
he was born in 93, so it was when he was in kindergarten, so I guess about 98, somewhere around
Mm.
there. And his
Well, that
kindergarten,
gives us a little bit of a clue of what was going on in the science industry,
yeah,
of how much they knew about it, because there was a time when there was no such thing as ADHD, and
right.
people didn't know
Yeah.
that. When it first came out, they threw Ritalin at everyone, and
Yeah.
and that was like, no, no Ritalin, no Ritalin. So it's like, you know, just giving people a little timestamp of where in the story
Mm.
that is
Hmm.
at.
Yeah, and I've I had a summer camp for boys ages 8 to 15 that I ran as a ministry for 5 years, and so I was, and even outside of that in church, I was working. Before that, I was working with boys in particular, and um, I've seen boys, and other and girls too, but my I was really my specialty was in working with the boys, and I saw, I got to see children who are in a, much further on the other end of the spectrum than Chase in
Mm,
terms of the ADD, ADHD. His was a mild case compared to a lot that I've seen, and
mm,
but his teacher was really kind of pressuring us to do something, to take him and have him looked at, and so we did make an appointment. Finally, we resisted it for a while, and we were concerned that he was going to have issues in school if we didn't do something, and he would be sort of hyperactive at times. But so we took him to see the psychiatrist, and he diagnosed him ADD without the hyperactivity. And I'm like, well, he hasn't lived with him. He only saw him for a short period of time, but he could be very active. But it was mostly the attention, that he would have trouble with focus in the classroom,
mm,
and um, so anyway, but um, he he was an average student, maybe slightly above average, and it was really in about the middle of the 10th grade that I began to have some issues with Chase.
mm,
He had always been very honest with us about everything. If he ever was caught and he thought he was going to be in some kind of trouble for something that he did, he would always tell the truth about everything. And now I caught him in a couple of lies over some
mm,
things, and just the different things going on that had me a little bit concerned about him. And then he started failing. He was failing Spanish and some of his other classes. His grades were declining, and um, uh, he was getting rebellious, becoming
mm,
rebellious at home. And I said, man, what am I going to do? I was trying to talk to him and didn't seem to be making a lot of progress. And I will say this, that he was always more comfortable going to his mom because I was that disciplinary figure. I was the tough guy, and so he would always go talk to mom when he had an issue, and so she uh then she would relay the information to me, but um anyway, it was in yeah, like I said, middle of the 10th grade, and I couldn't figure out what to do for Chase. I couldn't figure out how to solve the problem. And having the military background that I had and everything, having this conversation with one of my friends, my best friend, actually, we've been friends for many years, and he was in the military too, and that's how we met. And he said, well, have you ever thought about maybe sending him to a military school? And I'm like, well, I don't know. That's for bad kids. Well, it's not necessarily true.
that
But
is the thought process people
that
tend to
does seem
have,
to be
though.
what most people think, and so I did a little bit of research, and I found out that some kids that he knew were attending this military school that we had known that he had played some sports with, and did a little research into this one school, and so I suggested that he transfer, and he wasn't crazy about the idea, but he didn't really fight me on it. Now, this goes back to that really mild mannered, easygoing type of person that he was, and we were very much alike in that regard. And if he, and I'm pretty sure now, if he could tell you, he would say, "Well, I didn't really want to go to that school, but my dad made me," and but he wouldn't tell me that at the time. So he did end up transferring. It was the middle of his junior year by the time he transferred to that school, and he did bring his grades up there. He got into several shenanigans while he was there, and he did suffer some disciplinary action there, and but he got through it and graduated, brought his grades up. And I'm trying to think what else to tell you about it. He had an amazing senior year of football while he was there. He went from a school that was a big school, pretty big high school with around 2,500 students, and playing on the football team there. And he went from being, a smaller fish in a big pond to being a big fish in a small pond at this school. And he really was a standout there his senior year. And so there were a couple of Division II type schools that were interested in him, and one made him an offer.
Wow.
And so he headed off to college there, and that's where things really took a turn for the worse.
Oh boy, what happened at college? Was he 18, 19 when he went to college? How old was he when he died?
Yeah, he was 20 when he died, and yeah, he was 18 when he went to college. And when he got there, they redshirted him, and everybody may not be familiar with that term. People that are familiar with football will know, or with college sports. What it means is he would get an extra year of eligibility, and in his freshman year, he wouldn't play. He would get to practice with the team. He would get to stand on the side, dress out, and stand on the sidelines, but he couldn't play any. But it gave him an extra year of eligibility later. And so they would do that with young players that needed to grow a little bit and get a little bit bigger. And he was always on the smaller side. So, but he almost immediately gravitated to a crowd that was abusing drugs and alcohol, and so he began to abuse drugs and alcohol, and I was catching on to that, and I was trying to talk to him about it a little bit, and he came home at Christmas for Christmas break, and he was on academic probation. And I said, Chase, you don't have to go back to college if you don't want to. You can always go to a community college, or there's a military. There are a lot of other different things you can do. And he wasn't interested in any of that. He said, no, I want to go back. Well, he wanted to go back because, he wanted to hang out with those people, and he wanted to use drugs, So he did go back, and it wasn't long in his second semester before he dropped out. And oh man, there's so many more details of the story there, but he came back home eventually, and when he got back home, immediately gravitated to an even rougher crowd here at home. And he would be gone for days at a time and not communicate with us, not call us. And that was one rule my wife had. It's like, look, you're not looking for a job. You're not trying to do anything. But if you're going to live here, you're an adult now. You're not trying to go to college or do anything like that. Then if you're going to be gone overnight, you need to at least pick up the phone and call us and let us know you're going to be overnight, and give us some idea of where you are and when we can expect you back. But he wouldn't do that.
Wow.
And he would be gone for days at a time. And
wow. Well, when he started this, if you go back to when he was in college, and he was going to play football, right?
Yep.
But then they weren't letting him play football. Do you think that had anything to do with him going into drugs? You think that just is coincidence?
I think it's mostly a coincidence. I think, he was still
Sometimes people get into it out of curiosity, but sometimes they're trying to self-medicate something. So
yeah.
I don't know. There's
Well,
different reasons why people, it's not always anything.
well, when I mentioned to his pediatrician, after he died, when I had a conversation with her, she immediately used the term self-medicating.
Mm,
And I don't know. I know there's a correlation between ADD, ADHD, and addiction, drug addiction,
mm,
and alcohol addiction. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not sure anybody does, and I think they're still
mm.
studying it. But most every parent that I come in contact with that has a child who is addicted to drugs or alcohol, I will ask them, hey, is your child, have they ever been diagnosed ADD, ADHD? And I would say 90% of the time the answer is yes.
Wow.
Um, so there is definitely a correlation there. Is it the drugs that they're using to help control the ADD, ADHD? Does that have an impact? Is it the impulsive behavior? Because they can be very impulsive. What is it? Is it just the way the brain is wired differently? I'm not really sure, but there's
Yeah.
definitely a correlation.
Wow. So
Now I've had
how did he
kids.
die?
Well, he was uh like I said, he was using and being gone for a long time, and then I ended up locking him out at one point because he'd been gone for days without communicating with us, and
Mm,
um, I kept up with him on social media, um, and he was losing weight rapidly. He was pale, glassy eyed. In the
wow.
photos that I would see that he would post, and he wasn't a very big kid to begin with, but now he's just rail thin, looked
Mm,
terrible, and I became concerned about him, and we had an intervention for him here in our home, and we were able to get him into treatment through that intervention, and he got better. When I say he got better, that's relative, but um, he came home. He was in treatment for 30 days, then went to a halfway house, bounced around to several different halfway houses, and he was there for about 9 months in South Florida. And
mm,
when he came back, he was doing a lot better. He got a job. He liked his work. It was retail, but he was working in a pet store, and he liked animals, and the customers liked him. His coworkers liked him. Everybody liked him. He was a easy person to like. He had a kind of a interesting sense of humor, and like I said, easygoing and always trying to please people. So very easy to like, and made a lot of friends. But he was going to IOP, intensive outpatient care, 2 nights a week. He wanted to go, wanted to get better. So he was headed in a better direction. But as the months went by, I didn't know anything about addiction at the time. And as the months went by, he was beginning to relapse. I
mm.
knew something was up, but I didn't know, I didn't understand exactly. And he finally came to me one day. He said, Dad, I'm headed in a bad direction again. And really don't know what to do about it, but I'm hanging around a crowd that's not so good, and I know I need to get away from them, but I don't know how to do it other than to move. So he told me that he had taken a job transfer to Florida to the area where he had been in treatment, and told me when he was planning to leave. And I told my wife, Kim. Kim made Chase promise he would come by and have a meal with us before leaving for Florida. Well, the day came he was supposed to leave, or supposed to come by and eat with us, and he didn't show up.
Wow.
And it's getting later in the afternoon. Kim's beginning to get upset because she thinks Chase has left for Florida without even coming by to say goodbye. So
Mm,
we all moved to the living room, and we were just kind of sitting there. When I say we, it was Kim and I and our youngest son Justin, who was in the 8th grade at the time. So we're sitting there just talking a little bit, watching a little TV, surfing our phones a little bit, and I had a phone call about that time from one of my friends, and I didn't want to disturb them with my phone conversation, so I went outside. It was a really nice day out. It was May 29th, 2014, and um, I was standing out in my front lawn talking to my friend on the phone when a City of Raleigh police cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of our house. And I saw the officer get out of his car. I noticed he had a clipboard in his hand. He started around the front end of his car. Well, right where he was parked when he pulled up, over the years, I've seen police officers stop right there. And I don't know if they're doing paperwork or what. It's just a convenient place to stop. But so when I saw the car pull up there, I didn't think too much about it in the beginning. But then he got out. And well, the first thing I did notice, it was City of Raleigh. Well, we live in Cary. And Cary is kind of it's just, right on the outskirts of Raleigh. Raleigh is a bigger city. But when that kind of, I was like, what, City of Raleigh, what are they doing here? Well, he'd never been in any kind of trouble with the law. But I knew he was headed in a bad direction. And I thought, well, maybe he is in some kind of trouble. So I told my friend, I need to go. Police are here. And I hang up and I meet this officer in my driveway about midway. And that's where he told me, Mr. Rodgers, there's been a bad wreck out on I-40 and your son Chase died at the scene. And man, devastating. Yeah, right there where we were standing, almost in that exact same spot. I would throw Chase passes, playing football out in the front yard. I can't tell you how many hundreds or thousands I threw, and I would throw him just out of reach to watch him use his athleticism to make diving catches, and all that kind of stuff kind of comes back to you, and sometimes in moments like that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
anyway, there was a little bit of confusion about which house he was at in the beginning because there were several people in the car, and so that kind of added to the confusion. But my brain didn't want to hear what he was saying, and there was a long pause, and I looked at him and because I'm thinking, well, I misunderstood. He said he's hurt, or he said something else, and I said he's dead, and he kind of dropped his head and he said yes, sir, kind of quietly, and he asked me, is there anyone inside you'd like me to notify? I said, well, my wife and my other son are in there, but that's my job. Let me do that. I didn't want to do it. Wasn't looking forward to it, but I felt like that was my responsibility as a husband and a father to break that news to them. And so he asked me, can I go in with you for support? So I agreed to that. And we went in through the front door and turned immediately, looked at my wife, Kim, made eye contact with her. Justin was back in the corner on the sofa. And split second later, the officer comes in the door behind me, and I could see the expression on Kim's face change right away to one of like, this is, and she knew whatever I was going to say wasn't going to be good. And I just had to come out and tell her, honey, there's been a bad wreck and Chase is dead. And we all cried for a long time. It took a while to get settled down. And then we began to ask the officer questions about what had happened that day. Well, he didn't have a lot of answers. Not right then. He had a few, but not a lot. And as the days went by, there was a rumor that we heard that there had been a going away party for Chase the night before.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure that's accurate. And there was all kind of drugs and alcohol consumed at that party. So Chase and his friends woke up late the next morning. They were feeling hungover, and they thought, let's go to the park and smoke some marijuana, and that will help us cope with the nausea. So this part was in the police report. They did go to the park. They did smoke marijuana together, and then Chase let this girl. He had dated her at one time, really, really cute girl. He let her get behind the wheel of his car, and he got in the front passenger seat, and she had smoked with him. So they're all impaired at this point. Now, some people can argue that if they want, but I mean, they were impaired. And another kid got in the back seat, and they left that park and drove just a short distance, mile or two, made a quick stop, grabbed something to eat, got right out onto I-40 in rush hour traffic, and only went about 2 miles before she lost control of his car in a curb. They were running about 70 miles per hour. There were some eyewitness reports that they believed that a she drifted over on a car that was in her blind spot, and that car blew the horn, and that may have startled her because they think that she overreacted, jerked the steering wheel, and that's what caused her to lose control. But car spun out of control. It was actually my dad's car that had been handed down to Chase. My brother had left it in a handwritten note. I had the title actually was in my name because my brother, having power of attorney, had signed it over to me, even though it was to go to Chase. And so I had kind of withheld it from Chase because I saw he was headed in a bad direction. But there's a whole nother story behind that. But I had delayed giving it to him. But it was a Toyota Corolla. It was low mileage, garage, in really pristine condition. And anyway.
And she lost control. Did all of them die or just Chase?
Just Chase. But my dad, he had one of his Bibles was in the trunk of the car with his sermon note still in it, which is just ironic, to me when if you knew more about the story. Is just anyway. But a lot of details I can't get into there, but when she lost control, the car left the road. It struck a tree, and they were running about 60 by the time they impacted the tree. It hit on the impacted on the driver's side rear door, and then the car kind of rolled up on its side. Well, when it rolled up, Chase being the front seat passenger, the most of the force came right across where he was sitting with the tree. And anyway, he died at the scene. Probably died instantly, but I just don't know that. I just don't have that information. But it died at the scene. And it took the firefighters almost an hour to get the three of them out of the car. It was such a mangled mess the way it was bent around the tree. And they transported the two survivors to the hospital right away, and they had very serious injuries. And over the next several weeks, they recovered to the extent that they could come home and continue their recovery at home. But then 7 months after the wreck, just a few weeks prior to what would have been her first court appearance, the young lady that had been driving Chase's car that day died after a fire broke out in her apartment. And the fire chief said that based on their investigation, they believed that she poured gasoline all over the floor of her apartment, stood in the middle of it, and ignited it. And she left two suicide notes, one physical note, one online. Yeah.
Wow. Survivor's guilt is what it sounds like. Is that what it was? Survivor's guilt. She was driving, he died, and she lived, but then she has to testify. And oh wow. How did you and your wife and your son get through all this horrible pain of, I mean, a parent should never have to bury their child.
Right.
Ever. It's just awful. So how did you guys make it through that? It's been, you said it was 2014. Now it's been 9 years. I mean, you're doing so much to help other people not have to endure the kind of pain that you have been through. How did you make it through that? How did you get from there to where you are today?
We each had our own journey. I mean, we journeyed through it together, but it is different ways for each of us. My wife went to a program called Grief Share, and she went by herself. I didn't go with her. She went by herself, and she went through it twice. It's a 12-week program with other people who were grieving, and from different losses. It's a Christian program. It's in, different churches around have that. And you can look it up online for those that are listening, that it's a really good program, because I've
heard of it before. Yeah. Grief Share. Listeners, it's Grief Share. SHARE. Grief Share.
That's right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. She, like I said, I was kind of doing my own thing. And I wish I had been a little more in tune to her needs, but at the time, I was kind of doing my own thing, being a typical guy, and
so you said being a typical guy. I want to pause there for a minute, because that's something we talked about before we started the interview about typical guys. And so she went and got help, and you
Yeah.
were, as you quote, typical guy. Did
Mm.
that cause you to take so much longer to heal?
I don't know. Kind of early on, I wrote part of what I was doing. I was grieving in my own way, and I was very angry in the beginning. And right in the initial stages, I wasn't angry. In fact, I told people that I was close to, I said, I want to do something to make a difference. I want to do something. I want to use this, as a platform and get out there and make a difference so that other people don't have to go through this sort of thing.
Mhm.
But then I hit this phase where I was just really angry, and I was angry at myself. I was angry at Chase. I was angry at pretty much the whole world. And
Makes perfect sense. It's
yeah,
very, very common. It's one of the
yeah, it
big
is. Yeah,
aspects of grief.
yeah. And so I went through that stage for a while, and I kind of regret sometimes that I was in that stage and didn't reach out to the driver. That I didn't. So I went to visit the kid that was in the back seat, and she was one floor up above him, and I never went to see her, and never really had the conversation with her. And anyway, and I was pretty angry at her, even though really it was Chase's car. He was the oldest one there. That he bears the lion's share of the responsibility as far as that part goes. But
Mhm.
um, anyway, yeah. So I started writing a book, and that was where I was pouring my anger into that book. And when you read the book, you can sense that. And I didn't really understand addiction at the time, and you can see that too for
What's
anybody
the
that's
name of your
familiar
book? Can
with
you show
addiction.
it to us?
Yeah, it's A Life Half Lived, a true story of love, addiction, tragedy, and hope. Let me see if I can get it in the right
Is that a
spot
picture of
there.
Chase on the cover?
That's Chase. Says that is a self-portrait of Chase. He took that picture himself. He edited the eye. Um, he was great with any kind of computer software.
That's a powerful picture.
It really is. It really, really is. And
So writing that helped you to process your
it,
your grief and your anger, getting it out. And so it's probably a really good book for people who at the very beginning of their journey. But you've
yeah.
changed a lot since then as
It's
well.
changed a lot. Yeah. I mean, I go back and I read, a few times I've gone back and read it, and I'm like, I cringe a little bit, like, oh man, my thinking was so in the wrong place on some of these things. But it seems to resonate with a lot of people. And even people had comments from people who are in recovery from addiction that they really got a lot out of the book, So, God, he works in interesting ways sometimes, right? In mysterious ways. So I guess it was written the way it was meant to be written.
Mm.
And but yeah, it was part of the healing process for me. And then I began speaking. Someone asked me to invited me to a church to speak. I think actually the very first speech was for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, part of
Mhm.
the Governor's Highway Safety Program, and it was more of like a press conference type of event
Mm.
with some government officials and that sort of thing. And anyway, I think that was the first one, and then I got invited to speak at a church, and it just started from there. And so the speaking has been very healing for me. It's kind of in a weird way because every time I speak, I have to fight these waves of emotion, as I'm reliving the whole day, the whole story. And I'm a very emotional kind of guy, and so those kind of things I have to, control all of that, and it's tough, But then I have people who come up to me after the talks and tell me how much they got out of it, and sometimes it's people who do have an addiction or who are in recovery, or it could be another parent going through the same thing, or a parent who's lost a child, or something along those lines. And or sometimes it's a kid who's under some peer pressure to use drugs, and they hear the story. And I've had a lot of good feedback from people, and that makes it all worth it to me.
Mhm.
So there's something about, how you when you do a lot of hard work with your hands, you build calluses, and there's something about that. When I say build calluses, maybe that's not such a good analogy in the sense that I haven't become calloused at all. But I'm a little bit tougher in some respects, and God has definitely, he's definitely used this whole situation to help me grow and help me grow spiritually and become a stronger person. Now, it's not a straight line of growth,
Grief is not a straight line. No,
right.
growth is not a straight line.
That's right. It is kind of like the stock market. If you look at the stock market, there's a lot. Sometimes it's like it's going, and then boom, you have a huge setback. But hopefully over time, it's the progression is upward, and
well, it's like that standard picture we've seen, and I've redrawn it myself for one of my books, where they have this picture of, your goal and my plans from here to there, straight line, bam,
right.
There's a little flag on the top of the thing. And then they have reality with the hole in the ground and the water pit and the
right. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, that's a good one.
And you've written other books too. Did you write them before that one or after that one?
After that, yeah.
And what books are those?
I have Taking the Fight to the Enemy, which has a little bit of Chase's story in the beginning, and some of the things I was going through with the anger. And this is really about spiritual warfare.
Okay.
And it's my take on spiritual warfare, and I draw on a little bit of my military experience. And when I say military experience, I want people to know that I was never deployed, so I don't have any combat experience, unlike my brother, who I see as a hero in many ways. But I don't. When people recognize people who are veterans, I don't usually immediately raise my hand or stand up, because I don't think of myself as a veteran, because I served in the Army National Guard for 12 years. But I never was deployed. I'm not a combat veteran. To me, that's a whole different level. And it's not that I mean, sure, I would have gone if the opportunity had been, if they had called me to go. But anyway, it's just my thing, that's just kind of how I am with that. But yeah, I do draw on that a little bit, that experience, that background when I for that book. And I do have one other that is The Secret Superpowers of Teenagers.
And what's that about?
It's about, it says, the subtitle is How to Shape Your Future and Transform the World. And it's really about just putting in place some principles that the biggest thing I see with teenagers is a lack of confidence. And when they lack confidence, what happens is they're a lot more subject to peer pressure. If they're So I want to do everything I can to try to build their confidence and let them know. And I, even when I give talks to people who are, I do some talks called VIP talks, where I talk to people who are DWI, first-time DWI offenders. And I know that some of those people in the room have had a tough life. I know that some of those people, have some trauma and have some addictions. A certain percentage of them. And so I talk to people. I always tell people, like, you know what, you were made in God's image, and you were put here for a purpose, and you need to go live your purpose. And if you've got a problem with drugs or alcohol, guess what? Everybody has problems. It's just a different problem. The Bible says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And you need to get over this guilt and shame thing and go get the help that you need and get on with living your life and doing the things that God has called you to do.
Yeah, building people's value. They really need to see their value. Someone who has suffered trauma, it steals them of their sense of value. So like you said, they lack confidence. They don't see the value in their own life. So thank you for pouring into them in that way, to see that they are made in God's image and they do have a purpose. Even if they feel purposeless, that feeling is not really true. So thank you for that. Is there anything that you want to make sure that you share with our listeners before we end our wonderful time together here?
I really love people in general, and I think it's because God loves me. And I want to share his love with other people. And man, we just need more of that.
Amen.
Um,
That love. So
I
how can
know
people connect with you if they want to have you speak at their event, at their meeting, at their gathering, or whatever situation they have? How can they connect with you to get your books? Where can they get your books, and how can they get you to speak?
um sorry, I'm getting so emotional on here.
Oh, no apology necessary.
I really do love people, and I love working with people and love to help people. And I hate to see people hurting and not getting, the help that they need. But they can reach out to me through, I have a website that is thefamilyrecoverycoach.com, and they can connect with me there, or they can connect with me through. I have a Facebook group for parents, specifically for parents who are struggling with a son or daughter with a substance use disorder. And that is, if they will go to Facebook and just search for parenting addicted children, they'll find that. And that is the type of work that I do now. I do speak, and I want to do, I do a fair amount of speaking. Still have been speaking since 2016. Um, but I do have a coaching program where I coach parents who have a child who has an addiction, drug or alcohol addiction. So they can reach out to me through that website, or through the Facebook group, or they can send me an email. And my email address is drodgers61. That's Rodgers. That's the correct way to spell Rodgers, by the way. 61 at hotmail.com.
Awesome. And I will put that information in the show notes for everyone on the Victorious Souls podcast. So, and I just thank you for being with us today, Darryl, and thank you for sharing your heart. And for those of you who are only listening to this and could not see, Darryl got choked up. He shed tears because you who are listening, you matter. You matter. He loves you. I love you. I'm that lady on the internet who loves you. I say that all the time. And so until next time, bye-bye.